got an extremely loyal customer base. I don't regret anything, but we could have been a much bigger company had we approached it differently from the onset.
This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes, leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others.
I love this interview because I got to go geek and nerd out over some software guys that run their own company. And that's always fascinating to me as a software guy.
Yeah, but as Seinfeld would say, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I had to cut a bunch of the stuff out that I asked because I kept asking questions about, quadratic defibrillators. Not really. That's a fictitious term. But I asked questions that my listeners would not care about at all.
Okay, but what are your listeners going to care about with this episode, Brent?
Well, the part I think that's really fascinating here with Walter is the transparency that he provides about, he's sitting here thinking about what he would have done differently, and he's very open about sharing his lessons learned. And they're so good. There's so many things that if you're a business owner out there, you should pay attention and listen to what he has to say. And yet at the same time, you and I both are looking at their website, looking at their Facebook community. They have an extremely loyal customer base.
Right, and I think that their transparency leads to the customer service, which helps them excel.
Yes. And we've talked for years about the power and the value of customer service, especially in small business, at retaining us. Like, if you're going to keep my business, if you're a small business, support me, right?
So whether you want to nerd out on technology or if you just want to hear a businessman talk about transparency of lessons learned, there's something in this episode for you.
Enjoy.
Started when I was very young, I guess, middle school. One of the teachers brought in a little computer, a TI-99 4A, and I just fell in love with the thing and ended up helping her teach the rest of the class how to do it. I went and bought one for the house and learned how to use it, and so I just became a programmer at a very early age. This was early 80s,
wow.
81 or so.
Yeah.
And so I knew from then on I was probably going to be a programmer.
What language was that?
It was basic,
yeah.
but we did other bit twiddling kind of stuff with
Sure.
assembly. But mostly I just played around in basic,
Okay.
basic A or GW basic, and just that was way back.
Oh yeah,
so few memories remain.
Yeah, I remember basic. I
Yeah.
did a little bit, dabbled with it a little bit early on.
Yeah. Anyway, I started going to school. I never really did good in high school or college or anything. I just couldn't really stay focused. So didn't do good, and I was trying to get a degree in computer programming, and they were teaching me like Fortran and COBOL and these languages that were already kind of dying and not going to be helpful, but that's the only courses they offered at UNT. Yeah. I switched over to DeVry to try and get some better. They at least had some modern languages in there. Pascal was one of them I was learning, and even that didn't feel very current. So I ended up, just getting a job as a programmer. It was for a ministry in Dallas, and helping automate all of their they had a really massive call center where they did inbound prayer ministries and things like that. So It was a really fascinating job. And I ended up automating the whole call center. I wrote programs that interface with these ancient AT&T, mainframe kind of phone systems so people could dial a number to log in and on their phone to punch in for the day, and they ran payroll and all sorts. So anyway, that's how my career really got started. Playing with computers turned into just this job, going from being on the phone lines to actually writing code to automating that whole center. And then from there, I got a job as a programmer at a small company called TTG, and that company continued to grow. They did stuff in the travel industry, corporate travel industry, so a lot of back-end stuff, processing reservations and quality control. And I got on a team where we were building a tool that was for booking your own travel. This is pre-internet.
Wow.
So it was for corporations.
Yeah.
There was actually something you'd have to install.
Okay.
There was a DOS installer and everything.
Okay.
It was very,
So a company would have like an expert at this software to help navigate and booking and do some of those things for their corporate travel.
the whole thing was automated.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, the whole thing was automated. So we were writing a virtual travel agent, and
Wow.
and back in, this was early '90s. This was pretty cutting edge stuff.
Yeah.
And it was really popular. The company kept growing. The product was called ResAssist. It eventually became ResX when we ported it to the internet, when the internet rolled around some years later.
Sure.
And so, I continued to grow with that company. I became VP of Product Development. There was, I guess, a team of about 50 or so under me that did development and management of the software, and had a bunch of other little projects that we did and worked on and stuff.
And this was coming straight out of high school. Coming straight.
Pretty much, yeah. Still no college degree or
Right,
anything
right,
like that. Yeah.
right.
So it was all self-taught, everything.
Yeah.
And that was actually, it hurt me a lot, I
Did it
think.
really?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of not really having any education on accounting, on HR, and trying to manage people without real management experience, or, trying to figure that kind of stuff out on your own is a lot harder than figuring out programming.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But still, you get it, and it works. And
Sure.
so I continued to grow, but I was a better programmer than I was a manager, I think. And as the company merged and grew, I eventually got petered out, so Peter principled out, I would say. You get promoted to your highest, what is it?
Your stall point.
Exactly. Yeah. So they let me go. They gave me a good compensation package and things like that. But I also had a non-compete, so I couldn't just dive back into the industry.
Yeah.
And so I spent a year just kind of building my own thing. And I built this thing called the Adventure Pilot website. This was 2005. Built the Adventure Pilot website. It was a site where pilots, I guess I failed to mention that somewhere along those lines, I went and got a private pilot license
Okay.
as a hobby.
Just something to do.
Just to have fun.
And maybe for our listeners, we're sitting at the McKinney Airport, which is awesome by itself. I was telling you when I got here, this is the kind of thing that makes me love podcasting, because I get to come to these crazy places and meet amazing people and hear their stories. Continue. So you had this pilot background. That's how it kind of came in as a hobby.
Yeah. And it's I mean, it was an important part of my life. I'm surprised I just kind of glazed over it, but yeah, it's a hobby. It's kind of a big investment to get into as a hobby, but man, it was just so much fun. I partnered with a buddy of mine, who I'm still really close with now. He's a partial partner in this business that we're talking about, but we shared an airplane together and things like that, and flew all over the place and just had a blast. And so anyway, I spent this year and built a tool called the Adventure Pilot website, and it was just a place for pilots to go and load their favorite flying destinations. You can put reviews on airports and what you can do around an airport. There's a courtesy car that you can take to this restaurant, or there's something on the field, and something like that didn't really exist. And one of the things you don't realize as a pilot, you're kind of, if you want to go have fun, you're going to have to go land somewhere, and then you're stuck wherever you landed. So So we just provided the industry this database where they could find cool places to fly.
And maybe not big airports, but the places that would be a little smaller for amateur pilot, or is amateur the right word? How do you describe smaller plane pilot? What's the term?
Private pilot.
Private pilot.
Yeah, is the term. Yeah.
Got it.
But they're amateurs. You're not getting paid.
I don't want to insult them. They're way better than I am at it. Yeah. Okay. So now how did you get that out there for people to see?
We didn't do anything.
Okay.
We built it, and it just kind of started growing organically.
Wow.
Yeah. So people sharing the words, and it's
word of mouth.
Pilots are small. It's a small community.
Sure.
So word of mouth, and it just kind of grew over the years. I didn't really maintain it. It was a self-maintaining database. So one person would load the destination, others would post reviews, and sometimes you'd get a posting, this is closed, and the thing would just kind of fall out of the database.
Is that website still active today?
No, we finally sunsetted it, but just a couple of years ago. mainly because of the technology. It was built on a very old system because this, like I said, we built that in 2005.
Sure.
And I was either going to have to rebuild it from the ground up or just let it go. And utilization had fallen off. And it was never a revenue generator.
Sure.
It was just
fun.
Just a fun site. Yeah. So
and useful for you at the same time. Useful. Sounds like useful for the pilots as well.
We didn't. We kind of had aspirations of this thing becoming a company and being a big product, but it ended up just being something for fun. It was fun interacting with the community and stuff. And,
right.
And having something that people were using. It didn't really cost us much either.
Okay.
After my year of non-compete, I just started doing consulting in the same travel industry. And so I kept making tons of money just as an independent consultant, helping doing these projects for different travel agencies and things like that. And
software specific, but associated with the travel industry.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Corporate travel.
Okay.
Yeah. So
which is a big industry by itself.
It is.
Yeah.
It's big, and there's so many kind of embedded technologies when you're really experienced in some of like these archaic GDS systems like Sabre and WorldSpan.
Yeah.
If you're really good at understanding those technologies, you kind of have some value. And I was just one of those guys that's kind of able to bridge the requirements makers and the programmers and make things that work. And so, I did really good as a consultant for a few years.
Okay.
Then 2008 hit, and then the whole market crashed, and corporate travel got hit really hard. Lost all my contracts, and so I had to sit back and decide, well, now what's next? And that's when the idea for iFly GPS kind of, finally resolved. The guy I mentioned earlier, his name is Bill. Bill and I had talked about building something that you could use for navigation.
Sean told me about Bill too.
Oh, did he?
He did. Yeah. Got to meet this guy.
He'd be a good interview.
All right.
You'd like to talk to Bill.
Connect me with him.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
He's got a bunch of other companies. Even better would be his wife. She actually gets stuff done.
Yeah, I can relate to that. My wife is the brains of this operation, way more than me. I'm just the talking head.
That's funny. Yeah, I can relate to that. So, 2008, actually it was 2009 we really got started. But
so where did the idea come from?
All right, well, good question. So Bill and I took a trip through Mexico in our little airplane. And Bill, he's a programmer as well. He's the guy that originally hired me at TTG. And he was already a pilot. He's kind of the guy that really got me interested in it. Well, we're taking a trip through Mexico, and he pulls out his laptop, and he had written this really rudimentary moving map app because there were no maps of Mexico. There were, when you're flying in the U.S., it's pretty easy. The FAA provides all of these charts, both digital and printed, and it's just super easy. There was nothing in Mexico. So he figured, I'll just write something, and he did. And he wrote this really, clunky moving map that ran on Windows. So he pulls this big laptop out, and we're both kind of tweaking that app and improving it as we're flying through Mexico. In the air, it crashes, so we're typing in fixes and improving the.
But you had a general idea where you were going, so it was safe in that regard.
Yeah, it's still. We're following the coast anyway, so it's hard to get lost.
Okay.
But at least we knew how far off,
But you can partially say you were developing this app in the air.
We kind of were.
Yeah,
at least the bones of it, and
Right.
and the part that made us realize, we could make a real tool out of this.
Okay.
And so some of that code still exists today in
Wow.
the app. Some of it.
Wow.
So we come back. This was, I don't know. That was early 2000s, 2001 maybe when we were doing that. But so. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, and I'm sitting around wondering, all right, I don't have any more contracts.
And this had been sitting in your pocket kind of the whole time. I just not thought about it this way.
Hadn't thought about it at all. I am not the kind of guy that's going to quit my job and start a company.
Yeah.
I'm a very conservative guy and very concerned about my next paycheck. I want to make sure it's coming. And so when you're starting a company from the ground up, you don't have that assurance.
Sure.
So it really took, a market crash to get me to do it, because I could have either just started putting out applications and finding a job as a programmer somewhere, which did not appeal.
Yeah.
I'd been kind of working as a consultant for several years, setting my own hours and really loving what I was doing. and it was working out. And so it just gave me the confidence, just, okay, let's just take a year and build this product. And we did. And I say it was about 80% me and 20% Bill.
Okay.
He was mostly giving feedback and stuff like that because he had lots of other stuff going on.
Sure.
So I built it, and in late 2009, we released it. Now, this wasn't an app that you would download. I started hearing in the back of my mind this thing about an iPhone, was starting to show up on ads and stuff in 2009, but this was an actual portable GPS. So it was like
So you had hardware as well.
It was actually hardware.
Okay.
Yeah, and we procured the hardware. We found a company that had a device similar to what we want. We did minor tweaks to it, and so we were having to purchase and import hardware for this. And then we started selling it, and that's when things really took off. Now, I had the database of users that use the Adventure Pilot website.
Okay.
And that was how we got the word out initially for this product. So I just did an email blast to that group saying, hey, we're offering this product.
Wow. So you already had this really great network to market to.
So prior to release, we already had a lot of validation that there was a demand for this product. And it went really well. So that first 6 months, a year or so, the company grew by leaps and bounds, faster than we could contain it, really.
Wow.
We had to move out of the house really quickly into an office and hire some people to help with support, things like that.
Yeah.
Remember the first couple of trade shows, there's one huge trade show in our industry called Sun and Fun, another called Oshkosh or AirVenture. And at those shows, it was me and Bill, and the booth was just packed, and we were having to stand up on our tiptoes to try and get our voices to carry to all these people that were lined up several rows deep, just trying to explain the product and demo it.
And what technology existed for folks at that time?
Well, there was some stuff similar to it, but it was much slower and much more expensive.
Okay.
So when we released, the hardware itself wasn't that expensive, and we weren't. We were, I don't know, we priced it about a third of the price of our biggest competitor, which was Garmin.
Okay.
And most of the products out there were about a third of the price. I mean, we're about 3 times our cost. So that was one of the huge differentiators. One of the others was the FAA has been producing these maps called sectionals, which were scanned digital, or just it's like a map.
Okay.
Well, we were scanning those and actually taking digital versions of those and overlaying that as part of our moving map experience. So instead of seeing these, vector drawn circles and lines and stuff, we actually had a full resolution, full color map that we were geolocating your aircraft on, and so the experience was a whole lot better for a lot of pilots that were used to using just paper sectionals. They could transition to this product, and everything they're looking at is identical to what they're used to navigating with.
Well, it sounds like the other products that might have been out there weren't developed by pilots necessarily. It was more repurposed technology from someplace else.
Right. I mean, the big competitor, Garmin, I mean, they're still out there, and they're still massive, but they're, predominantly developing from, from foreign developers and management, just trying to figure out what's going to make the next dollar, and they weren't really pilots.
Whereas you were customizing software for pilots by pilots.
Exactly. That's one of our tags: by pilots for pilots.
Yeah. Awesome.
So anyway, that's how the company got started, and it's grown ever since then. And that's the basic story.
Okay. Now you alluded to the iPhone, so you had hardware previously you're selling. As the iPhone and the smartphone adoption starts to take place, how did you adapt to that?
We adapted a little late. So, we started hearing about it in 2009 when I'm building, and I'm like, that'll never work. That's not going to happen. And then the iPad came out, and I'm like, I don't know about that. And then a company came out.
You sound like a hardware guy. That's what the hardware guy. I'm traditionally a hardware guy, and I think, you need the hardware.
Yeah, well, you got to, once you have a hammer, everything looks like
that's
a nail,
right.
right.
That's probably true, right? So you had to adapt.
Yeah.
So how did that? At what point did you realize? All right, I gotta adapt to this.
So there's another company that came out. They're called ForeFlight, and it's a great product. And they came out exclusively for the iPad. So all you could do is run it on the iPad. And I was very skeptical about that because the iPad, especially the earlier versions, are very difficult to see in sunlight and shut down if they get hot. And there's all sorts of problems with it. And so I did not feel that they were going to be a competitor. But they continued to grow by leaps and bounds, far exceeding our growth curve. And when I saw that, I realized, okay, we're going to have to write a version for the iPad, and we did. And at this point, I had a couple of programmers and stuff, and so we all switched gears, and we spent basically a rewrite of the product so that we could put it on the iPad and on Android. And so we were a few years late to that game. Consequently, ForeFlight dominated that market, and to this day they still do. They probably have 80% of the market share. I'm not one to have regrets, because it's not really fruitful. But I think it makes sense to look back and say, what could I have done different? And this might help others. And there's a couple of things ForeFlight did that I immediately thought, I would not do that. And now I think, maybe I should have done that. And one of them, they got a ton of investor money up front. We went into this company, my wife and I failed to mention that my wife is Juanita. We're hand in hand doing this company together. And so she's also very conservative like me, especially financially. So we tended to make early decisions. We're not going to go into debt. Other than our initial investment in the company, we wanted to make that back, and that's going to be our proof that this thing is working, and then we'll continue to move forward one year to the next, making sure we're profitable every time. ForeFlight came into it and got some massive investments, like millions and millions, and they poured that into development and marketing, and the company just exploded. They changed the industry for not just private pilots, but for corporate aviation as well. They're the ones that really got the iPad in the cockpit of a lot of carriers and things like that. So they had a big impact, and we didn't. We were just kind of trickling along, letting word of mouth spread our product and things like that. And so, you can see today that we're doing fine. We've got an extremely loyal customer base. I don't regret anything, but we could have been a much bigger company had we approached it differently from the onset. And took some chances and things like that. But
so maybe a part of it, their shift to get the funds involved in the marketing, but in addition, the vision to get onto the tablet quickly.
Those two things, as soon as that tablet came out, a lot of people recognize that as a game changer. I kind of did. I think I knew it was going to be a game changer, but I didn't want to spearhead that game change. I let someone else do it. And that's why, that's why we're not, a $200 million company. We're a few $1 million company.
The difference between taking the risk to jump out there versus what do they call fast follower to come in right behind and integrate the technology. Interesting.
There are some things we've really focused on to make sure we're different and to make sure we're relevant, make sure we're still growing as a company, and customer service is one. So we do invest a pretty good amount to make sure we've got good people here to answer the phone and answer the questions, keep our customers happy in that regard. Ease of use in the cockpit, it gets back to our roots. When you're demoing a product, especially like this, it can look really great on your desk, but when you get up in an airplane and you're bouncing around and the sun's beating down on the tablet, and it works totally different in the cockpit. So we've focused on usability in the cockpit.
How has that adjusted the comment you'd made early on about seeing the tablet and wondering about the lighting situation? I can relate to that. In fact, when you told me this the first time, I thought I didn't realize that people were using tablets to navigate. Private pilots were using this. That was quite interesting, and that's the first time I was like, oh yeah, I could see that makes sense. How have you guys adapted to that, or how's the industry adapted to that lighting situation? Is it just a matter of getting something that can hold your tablet and pivot a certain way?
Yeah, there's products out there. There's like glare shields that go around the tablet to kind of cast a shadow on the screen. But you see a lot of guys, sometimes you'll see them put their head down, or put their hands over their eyes and kind of cup it around the screen.
So still a bit of a problem.
It's still a problem today, especially. But every year those tablets are getting brighter. There's some Android tablets out there that are 800, 900 nits. Our portable device is like 1,300 nits, which is just a brightness rating. So it's significantly brighter, especially like the typical iPad. I think it's 300. It's a lot brighter compared to something like that. But they're getting better. Tablets every year are getting better.
Okay. You mentioned customer service. What else do you guys focus on to differentiate?
Well, and price is another one. We're still cheaper than a lot of the other products in the industry, and so. But I think customer service and ease of use in the cockpit are really big too.
Okay.
That we both plug when we're demoing the product and when we're talking about new features and focusing on developing something new. We're always thinking, how is this going to be used in the cockpit? Mm-hmm. And the way that translates is like we had a feature where you would touch and hold to pop up some information about an airport. You can just touch and hold on that airport. Seems great, right? But then you're touching and holding, and you hit some turbulence, and you bounce, and all of a sudden you got to start over your touch and hold, and so we just did away with that, and it's just a one tap now, and so simple gestures, fonts are a lot bigger, higher contrast colors, pretty basic simple things that we've got this kind of stack of rules that we try and obey with all our feature development. But ease of use is pretty important for us.
And in vehicles, everything's gone to hands-free where it's audible. Where I'm going to gripe a little bit about mine. Android Auto just drives me crazy. The features are great, right? I use the concept of Android Auto to describe the what we call the first world problems to my daughter when she and I were going to Costa Rica a couple of years ago. And she said, "What does first world problem mean?" I go, "You ever been in the truck with Dad when he tries to tell and says, okay, Google, do this or do that, and it doesn't do it, and I'm just ready to destroy the thing?" That's a first world problem. But it is something that the industry shifted that direction. When it works, it's really powerful. But I would imagine in a cockpit, the noise level is quite different. That's not going to be a realistic solution, right?
That I'm aware of, there's no one really doing voice recognition in the cockpit. Now you're wearing a headset and you got a boom mic and everything.
So it might be potentially possible.
It's possible, but you're not really hooking that boom mic up to your tablet right now. So there's really nothing to listen. Plus, almost all of those systems are using the internet to actually decode your voice into a language. You're not doing it on the device itself, and you're usually not going to have an internet connection.
Right. That was the other thing I was going to ask you. Is people aren't going to have their tablets set up with a cell signal, so that's most likely everything's downloaded, right?
Everything's downloaded. Yeah. So it could be 9 or 10 gigs to download the full data set.
Sure.
Big download.
So I suspect a lot of these pilots are dedicating that tablet to this, and not a whole lot else is going on. They probably don't have 4 seasons of Lord of the Rings or of Game of Thrones on there. It's probably focused exclusively on this. Right?
That's generally true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also because they're navigating with this thing, so they don't want.
Yeah.
They really don't want their kids playing with it.
Exactly.
Or, you'll see them. They're real reluctant to install OS updates because.
That was my next question for you: is how often? Because my phone gets a new update on it, and all of a sudden it's bricked. And it infuriates me. And I'm sure listeners out there can appreciate and relate to that. And I'm getting a new phone every couple of years. And I can't wait till my expiration gets up to where I can get a little bit of a discount on the thing because it's getting progressively worse. Yeah. How does that impact what you guys do?
We got to be careful of it, right? So we have to download those OS updates and buy new hardware quite often just to get the latest OS update, especially for Android. Even if you're on a beta or whatever, if you don't have the right hardware, you can't get Android 10. So we have to buy hardware sometimes just to test the latest OS.
Yeah.
And sometimes our customers still get it before us and report an issue. By and large, it's just not been a huge issue, though. We've had little nibbles here and there of things that have broken. There was one year, I forget, 2015 or 2016, when an iOS update broke the Bluetooth connections to a whole lot of the GPS modules that people were using. Most of the time, people are going to use a third-party GPS to get their, position information. They won't use the built-in one because it's just not very good. And all of a sudden, they lost their GPS capabilities because this latest OS wouldn't connect to the Bluetooth GPSs.
Yes, I could see that, yeah.
And we got a huge surge in sales because so many people were abandoning ForeFlight because they were unable to get a GPS lock, and this happened for a couple of months before there was actually a patch. And so that was a big issue. So the it is an issue, especially if you're using it as a mission critical device.
So you probably are keeping an eye on the roadmap of OS changes and tracking that pretty closely, right?
Yeah, we try and keep up with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
we
sure.
try.
Yeah, I expect you're probably your phone starts ringing as soon as it happens. I'm sure
So
when the changeover happens.
we hear about it pretty quick.
I would imagine, yeah.
When something breaks, yeah.
So I'm geeking out on you asking a bunch of technical questions because it's fascinating stuff what you guys do. But let me peel back to the idea of just transitioning to business ownership, right? So tell me about that experience where you come from a company where you're VP, you're in charge of this big organization, running this, and then going to this on your own. How was that transition?
Well, even as a VP, I was in charge of software development. And so I had all techies working for me, and I was just purely on the technical side. I got roped into sales calls and things like that, but I didn't have to do sales, and I didn't have to do HR. The company had their own HR department, and I didn't have to worry about accounting and just all of that stuff. So all of a sudden now I've got to do all of that. How am I going to market this product? How am I going to convince somebody to buy it? How am I going to do payroll? I've got some employees. Are we going to do insurance for them? All of this stuff we had to start figuring out. Mm-hmm. And as soon as my brain starts to cross over into those territories, it just kind of shuts down and I start programming. I don't know if you've experienced that before, but when you start getting into areas you don't want to be in, you just tend to fall back into
what you like.
Yeah. And so my wife came alongside to help me with a lot of this stuff. So from that first year when we started shipping products, before we had employees or anything, I was just kind of boxing stuff up and printing receipts, and she started looking at these and like, this is really sloppy, and so she helped me figure out we need a better box, we need a better case, we need better printed materials, we need a manual, and so she encouraged me a lot, and she was busy raising our boys because we had very young twin boys at the time. We still have twin boys, they're just not so young anymore. So she helps from the ground up with all of this stuff, and she did go to college. She has a degree, and so she's a little more well-rounded on the people side than I am. So yeah, now we continue to work together. She's in charge of operations, so she makes sure that the support team is doing what they're supposed to be doing, that all the packages going out have been properly QC'd, inventory's ordered when we need inventory. All that stuff is Juanita. She's taking care of that stuff for me.
Yeah, sounds like you guys pair up pretty well.
Pretty well. There's challenges along lines,
sure.
But
what's it like working with? Well, I know the answer to this, but for our listeners, what's it like working with your spouse like that?
I don't know. I think we're kind of unique in this regard. I really am able to separate work and home, and she's not. But when I go home, I like to just turn off work and focus on the family and the kids, or relaxing or whatever. But she's kind of always working, so that's one area where we tend to butt heads a little bit. And,
sure.
And but I'll tend to give and let her, talk about work and figure things out with her and work through it. But even before Adventure Pilot came along, we commuted together. We both worked in offices that were fairly close in Dallas, so we commuted back and forth to work, and I'd drop her off and then go to work. So we've been spending a lot of time together for a lot of years, and it's just worked. We've been married for I better get this right, 28 years now. So,
awesome.
Yeah. You get to know how to work with each other at some point, or you don't. So somehow we
something
did.
in the 3 to 7 year part mark. You got to sort that out, right? Yeah. So you're leveraging Juanita to help on the operations side and help with some of the things that maybe you're having a hard time. Tell me, like, going through the transition of hiring people, right? So we've talked about this before, about the challenges of hiring, right? And sometimes I complain about it in a big corporate structure, but there's so much support that I get for hiring. I'm usually given a pool of, sometimes I'm said, here's the person you're going to hire, and I don't like that. I'd like to have a little bit of say in it. But it's another world being small business owner trying to expand and grow. I guess in your case, you guys were growing quite rapidly, so you at least had the demand there. You could go higher, so it wasn't just a huge pain in terms of chopping at your bottom line right away if you had a good revenue stream coming in. But talk about the challenges of the growth that you went through.
Great question. There were two key hires that I made early on. One was a guy that I decided to put in charge of marketing. His name is Shane, and he worked with me for the next 8 years, 7 years, 8 years, and then we finally separated. And that's kind of a long story. So, but we're still in touch, and we love each other. He's a good man. But having him to kind of help with all of this stuff as well, just kind of he did a lot of the operational side as well, but focused on the marketing of the company was really valuable. The other key hire was a guy by the name of Brian, who's my lead developer now. He came along in 2010, so we've been together for 10 years, I guess, and he's still cranking out code and great ideas and loving working for the company. So having those kind of two pillars really helped everything else. The challenging hires have been really on the support side, for a couple of reasons. We want to hire pilots, and that's not easy to find a techie pilot.
Sure.
And we don't want to spend a lot of money on support. So for obvious reasons, we don't want to pay a programmer salary for somebody to answer a question about how to hook up a Wi-Fi. So that the circles don't align real closely there for the ideal hire, but we continue to find them. But the challenge is they're either going to be really good, in which case they're only going to be in support for so long, and as a small company, I don't have a whole lot of paths for growth. And so inevitably they're going to find a better job somewhere. They're going to have gained some aviation or some experience, and they're going to want to move on.
Right.
Either that, or there's a reason that they're not willing to, or not getting hired anywhere else. And we have to let them go, one or the other.
Some character flaw or something that's hard to weed out.
So we've had a lot of churn in the support department. Now, last year, I think we solved this. We got hooked up with McKinney Aviation Academy. The McKinney ISD here has a really good program for aviation. They got a really bunch of bright students there. And so now we bring on these interns. We've had 3 of them for the past, 10 or 12 months that just do support, and they'll come in the afternoons during school and, during the day, during the summer, and just help with the support. And so we've got, a lot of talent from these kids, and they love it. They're getting paid. They're making good money for a teenager, and they can connect with the technology real easily, and they know aviation, and so it may be solved at this point. But and we've made a new position, which is just one person that's in charge of the support team, which is usually just these interns, but it's working pretty well these days. But that has been a constant headache, the churn in support.
Yeah.
I heard somebody say hiring somebody is like you go on one date and then you get married. And,
yeah.
Because you just don't really know them.
Yeah, and I think when we were in Belize, we were comparing notes on this about, what question do I ask to try to weed out some of the challenges? It can be quite tricky, and I think software is a tricky by itself, right? I mean, hardware, I think both are probably the case. You got to get somebody up and on a board and give them a tough problem to solve and see how they manage it. But man, I can sit here and sound like I know what I'm doing, but I've had some failures myself in terms of the hiring process. It can be challenging.
I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to hire. I don't know how many hundreds of people I've hired at this point, and I still have no idea. It's just, it will roll the dice.
Yeah. More people involved seems to help.
Yeah.
If it's not, because if it's just me, I mean, that's another point of the value of diversity. If I can get 3 or 4 folks giving their opinion, usually the averages play out.
Yeah.
Not always, though. I've seen all of us get together and have just really bad results as well. So it just depends.
You can hire somebody that's really good at interviewing.
You can. Yeah. I've been told that myself, that I'm really good at the interview process. And I was like, that sounds like a backhanded compliment. I'm not sure. Well, tell me about where you guys expect your company to go next.
Well, we got some interesting stuff in the works. We've just recently hired another really kind of genius programmer, and we've started a new project. We're calling it iFly EFB, and this is not something we've really announced to the aviation community, but we will be soon. Start dropping some teasers on there. But the long and short of it is, when we built our product, it was built for a hardware platform, and we ported it to Android and iOS. But the user interface and everything, and a lot of the constraints are based on the lowest common denominator in this field of products we support, that one being our hardware. So we're going to rebuild it. It's going to be just for tablets, Android and iOS and Windows. It's going to have a whole lot more capability, and I would call it glamour, but just the polish is extraordinary on what we're doing next. And I expect that to help us take some more market share from the industry. Our product, as good as it is, as much as I love it, it does have, that first impression is not great, because when you download it, it looks dated. Well, because it's kind of an old interface. So we're solving that. We've also got some government contracts that are helping propel us up a little bit in revenue and recognition. Got some features we've done exclusively. One of our customers is the Army 160th, which is their Special Operations Airborne Unit, which is these are the folks that flew the team in to get Osama bin Laden. If you ever saw Black Hawk Down, that was a 160th aircraft, and so it's their special operations for the Army, their airborne special operations. So it's an exciting client, and we're finally leveraging that to get some more folks in that industry. We're doing fine, and I think we'll continue to grow. I think next year is going to look really good. This year with COVID, it's been fascinating. We had a couple of our big air shows, which we always get a lot of revenue and a lot of attention. The ones I mentioned earlier, the Sun and Fun and Oshkosh, those have been canceled, of course. So that's a big revenue hit. We've kind of just replaced it with some online sales and things like that. And so we're, continuing to move product. But it's.
How have you had to adapt as being the technical guy into the marketing space?
Well, it's funny. I was just talking to somebody earlier today that was asking me to explain the Google Analytics, because he was trying to figure out how well this last campaign did, and I basically told him, "You're asking the wrong guy. I've never looked at that. I have no idea what it is. I don't know what any of those numbers mean.
Bounce rate, you don't care."
I don't know. Yeah. So I've transitioned very poorly, and I think that's one of the reasons we're not more successful, because we have such a good product. It's just not a lot of people know about it, and it falls on me to not brought in the right guy that can. Or not spend enough money on the right guy. I don't know. But
you have somebody in charge of marketing?
I did.
Okay.
We parted ways just a while ago. Shane was the guy doing it for years and years and years. And when he left, I bounced a couple of guys in and out of that just didn't work out.
Oh, maybe there's somebody out there listening that can come bend your ear.
I'd love it if somebody knows the aviation industry and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I've got one guy now. His name is Rob. He's basically doing outside sales. So he's taken our product to schools that have aviation programs and finding other fleet accounts and things like. He's the one that found this new military account that we're doing. Yeah. So Rob's really good, but he's not marketing. He's sales. He's a connector. He's the kind of guy that can pick up the phone and just immediately, start exchanging valuable information. I can't do that, but he can. But he doesn't know the top from the bottom of a computer, and and he's not much in marketing either. So
Yeah.
I love Rob for what he does, but I still need someone to do the marketing side, I think.
Yeah, it's a unique skill. I was just having lunch with someone discussing this, that there's a lot of value. Almost every role has some level of marketing that has to be involved. And especially, and I don't know, I say especially, I don't know if it's unique to technical people or engineers, but my experience is those folks don't like to be, they're not great at this. They don't like to market. They don't like to market their own work. And it is kind of a necessary thing to be able to go grow. You have to.
And
right?
I've had a couple of failed attempts to use third parties to do this. I don't know what your experience has been, but there was one time I partnered with another company, and just instead of paying Google, I'd pay them to manage the whole AdWords campaign and things like that. Seemed to be going fine, but I started looking at, where are we, spending this money? And I looked at the campaign they were developing and managing, and it was more than Google. It was a bunch of other stuff, but by and large, the most money we were spending on this campaign were for people that were doing a search for the keyword iFly GPS.
Yeah.
And that just felt like a complete ridiculous waste. I mean, they're already looking for us. Why are we paying for that click?
Yeah, exactly,
Don't put that ad in front of them.
Right.
And so I let them go. A couple years later, I hired another company to refresh our website, and they had great resume, great experience talking to them and stuff, but the implementation was just horrible. And so we spent all that money and built a whole new website and just ended up throwing it all away.
Yeah.
It's really hard just to go find a third party. Need somebody to own it. And
yeah, that's been my experience. It's hard to get somebody. Marketing does require such a high level of ownership, right? And you have to have folks that are very motivated by whether it's through some sort of return compensation associated with sales. And if you can get the right recipe there with the right level of ownership, you get it's pretty effective. But third party, it's almost like a black box, right? And my cases where I have used it for my own business activities has been similar. It's like even when it is effective, I'm not real sure what's happening. It's a little black box-ish, and maybe it's just being the technical guy too that I'd like to see exactly what's taking place. We all want to know what our ROI is. What's the real? Where's the money being spent, and where's the real return coming from? But I guess if you're seeing value from it, then that by itself may be worth it. We'd all feel more comfortable. Certainly, I think small business more comfortable when we can touch and feel and see what's going on, right? Because we just don't want to take chances.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that. All right, Walter, one of the things we like to do on the podcast is to, we call it the point of minutia that you wish you'd known years ago. You could call it a hello younger me is what my friend Chris referred to it as. It was pretty great. If you're going to go back in time and you're going to whisper in the ear of the young Walter Boyd, what do you tell yourself to help you accelerate your success? It sounds like one of you hit on already, which is port to tablet.
That's not the one, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's the other one I hit on,
Okay.
which is get a financial investor to help with the company. And we decided just to cash flow it, and that limited what we could put into it, and it limited our growth.
Yeah.
And if we had a financial backer that could have helped us grow it a lot faster, things would be different.
Yeah. And at that point, you were confident that what you had was very unique and differentiated, and you had some success.
And at the time, I was confident that it would grow organically and become massive. Now, like I said before, this isn't a regret because we have a really good lifestyle company at this point. It's paying our bills, and we're happy, and we've got lots of happy employees, and there's really no negatives in what we have right now.
Yeah.
And we have no debt, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I'm not having to answer to a financial partner, but
you get to do what you want, when you want, how you want. That by itself is powerful.
Yeah. But if we did have a faster, if we didn't stumble out of the gate, I guess if we launched out of the gate, then it would be a completely different company.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. Cool. Or anything else you want to plug about the company? You hiring? You want to recruit a software person?
Well, we're fully staffed right now, but we're always looking for good people. I've always got my job postings listed, even if we're not actively hiring, because if the right person comes along, I'm going to be interested in them.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, we'll connect your. We'll have on when we post the episode. We'll have information for how people can get in touch with you, whatever mechanism is best for you, whether it's through your website or social media or email, whatever works best for you. Walter, thanks for taking the time to share your story, and I think it's good for people to hear anytime somebody's been successful, and also to learn from things where they could have been more successful is very powerful for people.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to share. Really enjoyed this. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Brent, at the end of this episode, he says that his minutia point was that he did not have someone else financially invest in his company, which is fascinating to me because that is the exact opposite of so many small business mindsets, that we all want to make sure it's our thing and not have investors, not have anyone we owe. I think we are probably going to have a financial investor conversation on this podcast.
Yeah, maybe so. I think each company is going to be different based on its leader's personality, and everybody's going to be different. The good thing is, despite all his transparency, these guys are outrageously successful. They've actually done very well. If you could sit there and run your own company and have this many people in your shop, that's pretty powerful by itself. And anytime you can do what you want, when you want, how you want, you've accomplished something by itself. Have a good week, folks.